Good morning, Americans. This is your favorite alien speaking on Saturday, January 12th. Wow, you're starting to fly by again, huh? Well, anyway, I wanted to do a video today to you Americans. Here it is. Today makes your shutdown the longest one in history. You ever figured out why? I haven't, because I've seen just politics out there from the Democrats and Republicans. All they're doing is screaming at each other and playing games and not even attempting to figure out the problem here. Here's my solution to this, American, and I'll give you a little background. Since you guys established your country in 1776, you've had every Tom, Dick, and Harry come here. And when they came, outside of the original 13 colonies and the people that were here in 1776. So anybody after that can trace their ancestry after 1776, it's the Tom, Dick, and Harrys that came in here. So you are considered migrants. And the reason I say this is because from 1776 to about 1865, you had a lot of Irish, German, Scottish, certain amount French, because you got them through the Louisiana Purchase, uh, and others, peoples. You didn't have any Spanish because the Spain still controlled that for the most part, than Mexico. I'll get to that later. But you had enclaves. I mean, you had the Dutch had New Amsterdam and you British took it over in 1655. So the Dutch stayed and created their enclaves. You had Germans. Heck, you got Germantown in Pennsylvania. Over in Michigan, you got Frankenmuth. And here in Helen, Georgia, it's an enclave of Germans. So you had them. You had Italians. You had, like I said, Scottish, Irish, uh, Austrians, and to a certain extent, you had them here. Polish, yeah, you can't forget the Polish. I mean, and you always had your bias. Remember, Irish do not apply. You Polish, you march backwards, and that's why the Germans occupied you because they marched backwards and you were leaving. All kinds of jokes. I've heard them all. Anyway, so they created their enclaves, but the Europeans, and you let them create enclaves. Like in Michigan, you got Hamtramck, Polish. You got other Polish communities in Wisconsin and Illinois, all over the place. Germans, Italians, Little Italy and New York City. Well, but then you had other people coming in because in 1865 you had the railroad, so you brought the Chinese in. And they created their enclaves known as Chinatowns all over the place. LA, San Francisco, New York, Atlanta. We got Chinatowns. And it comes with their customs. Same as the Polish and the other ones, but the Europeans blended into America. It took them a few generations, but they blended for the most part. But these other cultures have not. The Asians, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Vietnamese, the Latins, oh, they haven't blended at all. And that's the problem that you got today. You ever look at your cities? You got all kinds of problems. You got enclaves all over the place. And like I told Miss Pelosi, look at the district where Miss Ocasio won the Congress, and the people that have won the House seats that are Muslims, uh, and African Americans, and Native Americans. Those are enclaves. If you look at your demographics, they've taken over. Your white population is dwindling. Theirs are increasing. Your African American population is dwindling. Take here in Georgia. You've had a city election that Miss Bottoms just barely won. You had a governor election that was down to the wire, and the reason why Miss Abrams won is because the demographic is changing. And the more Latins you get here, the more this. So here's my answer, Americans. Number one, to get this border secured in the South, you need the states that border Mexico and the federal government to get together. That is it. You don't need the Congress. They have to decide what they want on their borders, and then they got to decide how their people in the state's going to react. Same with the northern border. Now, the other states that don't border anything, You have to get together with all 50 states and decide you can't dump people in my state. Because that's what the government has done for decades. Dump people on your states. And people come in and you take them. So you have to decide that. What do you think, Americans? Do you want more enclaves on your cities and start speaking, say, Polish or Japanese, Russian, Chinese? Because you're going to end up doing that. Spanish, you don't have to worry about. Spanish will be on the way out in about 50 years because the other enclaves, they'll do the same thing they did to the African Americans. Right now, the Spanish are number one. African Americans are dwindling and they don't understand why because they don't look at their demographics. But what are you going to do, Americans? What is American? You got to decide what you want to be Americans and do it. But you need to close your borders for a little bit, like 24 months, 36 months, and figure out what you're going to do with what you got inside here. That you need. And what you're going to do with your migrant workers. You know, you're going to give them, they need to have some sort of a documentation and pay scale. Because you got people here that bring them in and they give them pay, yeah, but then they're in such a debt because they owe for their housing, their food and stuff like that, they'll never pay the debt. That is slavery, people. So what are you going to do, Americans? Please write this alien. You can write me at Daniel DeGracia 359 at gmail.com. I want to be your spokesman because I'm a resident alien. And I figure that I know what you need to be an immigrant here. You don't have immigrants, you have a bunch of migrants. So what do you want to do? Thanks.